The calendar invite hit my phone like a death sentence. The cost of silence. My fingers shook as I clutched the laptop, the only proof of Vance's fraud. The hallway security guard lunged for my bag, his fingers brushing the strap. I bolted into the theater, heart hammering, knowing one wrong move and my evidence, and my life, would be gone. My roommate Emily's voice echoed in my head. "He's looking for your address." The laptop screen glared back at me, the files pulsing like a ticking bomb. I had seconds to decide, run or fight. But the real question? Who else was already on his side? The lecture hall smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. Sarah Miller slid into a creaking wooden desk in the back row, her shoulder blades pressing against the cold grain. Around her, students hummed with the low-frequency chatter of a Tuesday morning, the rhythmic tapping of laptop keys creating a digital rain. Her phone vibrated against her thigh, a sharp, metallic buzz that cut through the ambient noise. She pulled the device from her pocket. A calendar invitation illuminated the screen, the white glare stinging her eyes. Professor Julian Vance. The title of the meeting stared at her in bold, uncompromising sans serif. The cost of silence. 10 a.m. Room 402. Sarah's thumb hovered over the glass. The notification arrived exactly 3 minutes after she crossed the threshold of the hall. He wasn't checking his syllabus. He was watching the door. The digital invitation felt like a physical weight. A stone dropped into the pit of her stomach. She knew what this was. The blackmail email she had sent from a library computer 2 weeks ago was no longer anonymous. Vance was acknowledging the receipt, and he was doing it with the terrifying confidence of a man who owned the building. Sarah gripped the edge of the desk. The polished wood felt slick under her sweating palms. She reached for the small, leather-bound notebook in her bag, her ledger. It was her anchor. She flipped to the back page and whispered the final balance of her checking account. $212.40. The number was a cage. It was the reason she was here, the reason she had tried to squeeze a man as powerful as Julian Vance. She needed that debt gone. She needed her father's future secured. But as the projector hummed to life, casting a ghostly blue light over the room, the numbers in her head began to blur. The ledger wasn't protecting her anymore. It was documenting her downfall. A shadow fell over her desk, cold and sudden. Emily stood there, twisting the strap of her messenger bag until her knuckles turned white. She leaned down, her voice a dry whisper that barely reached Sarah's ear, smelling faintly of peppermint and anxiety. "Now Vance has the proximity logs," Emily murmured, her eyes darting toward the podium where the professor's leather briefcase sat like a squat gargoyle. "He installed the new Bluetooth beacons yesterday. He tracks every ping from your phone the second you enter the building. He knows you're here, Sarah. He knows exactly where you're sitting." Sarah's breath hitched. She felt a prickle of sweat at her hairline. The idea of invisible signals, little digital fingers reaching out to touch her phone, made her skin crawl. Emily's hand brushed Sarah's shoulder, a gesture of comfort that felt strangely heavy. "Get out of here, Sarah," Emily pleaded, her voice rising in that desperate pitch for validation she always used. "He isn't waiting for an apology. He's documenting your movements for the board. He was asking the registrar for your home address in Silver Spring this morning. He's going after your family, you know." The mention of Silver Spring, of the small, drafty apartment where her father sat clutching his Zippo lighter, sent a jolt of pure adrenaline through Sarah's limbs. She didn't move toward the door, though. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling as she tapped the record icon. If Vance was going to hunt her, she would record the sound of his footsteps. She needed evidence. She needed to turn this intimidation into a weapon she could use. The air in the hallway was cooler, but it offered no relief. Sarah moved quickly, her sneakers squeaking against the polished linoleum. She had to get to the library, to the hard backup of the files she'd stolen. But as she rounded the corner near the narrow stairwell, a wall of navy blue blocked her path. A campus security guard stood there, his chest broad and his face set in a mask of professional indifference. He didn't look like a man here to help. He looked like a debt collector. The heavy scent of industrial soap and old leather wafted off him. "Miss Miller?" the guard asked, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the tight space. "I need you to hand over that bag. We had a report of a suspicious intruder carrying a stolen device." "This is my laptop," Sarah said, her voice sharp, precise. "The total value is $800. I have the receipt. You have no legal authority to seize my property without a warrant." The guard didn't argue. He stepped forward, his hand reaching for the strap of her backpack. The movement was slow, deliberate, a display of power. Sarah felt the cold metal of the stairwell railing bite into her back. She wasn't going to let him take it. This laptop held the original fraudulent data she'd pulled from the university's financial records. The proof that Vance was skimming from the scholarship fund. As the guard's fingers closed around the nylon strap, Sarah didn't think. She acted. She drove the heel of her boot into the guard's shin. A sharp crack echoed through the hallway. The guard let out a choked grunt, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. Sarah lunged past him, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She didn't look back as she sprinted toward the heavy, velvet-lined doors of the university theater. The theater was a cavern of shadows and the smell of stale grease paint. Sarah ducked behind a row of oily velvet seats, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The green exit sign above the stage door cast a swampy, sickly hue over the empty rows. She clutched the laptop to her chest, her fingers tracing the jagged edge of the plastic casing. She was safe for a moment. She just needed to think. "Sarah." The voice came from the darkness of the wings. Sarah froze. Emily stepped out into the green light, her bubbly smile gone, replaced by something flat and unreadable. "I followed you," Emily said, her voice devoid of its usual, tick. "I wanted to make sure you were okay. You shouldn't have hit that guard, Sarah. That's a felony. You're making this so much harder for yourself." Sarah felt a wave of relief. "Emily, thank God. You have to help me. I have the files. If we can get to a public network, I can send them to the police. Vance can't stop us if the data is out there." Sarah opened her laptop, the screen's glow illuminating Emily's face. She felt a surge of hope. This was the smart move. Emily was the only person she trusted. With Emily as a witness, Vance's intimidation wouldn't stand a chance. Sarah began to type, her fingers flying across the keys. "I'm uploading it to the cloud now," Sarah whispered, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Once it's synced, he's finished." Emily walked closer, leaning over Sarah's shoulder. "It's a good plan, Sarah. Really. You're so much smarter than the others." She reached out and gently touched the screen, her finger tracing the progress bar. "Is it done yet?" "Almost," Sarah said, her shoulders dropping as she finally allowed herself to breathe. "Just 10 more seconds." "We won, Emily." Sarah noticed a small detail. Emily wasn't looking at the progress bar. She was looking at a small, blinking light on the side of her own bag. A light Sarah recognized. It was the same Bluetooth beacon Vance used to track students. Sarah's brow furrowed. "Emily, why do you have a university tracker in your bag?" Emily didn't flinch. She didn't look away. The flat expression remained, but her voice shifted, becoming colder, more refined. "Because Uncle Julian likes to keep his family close, Sarah. He's very protective of his own." The air in the theater suddenly felt freezing. Uncle Julian. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow to the stomach. The room seemed to tilt, the green light of the exit sign turning into a nauseating smear. "You're his niece?" Sarah whispered, her fingers freezing on the keyboard. "I've been monitoring your screen for 3 weeks, Sarah," Emily said, her voice now perfectly calm. "Every keystroke, every anonymous email. Did you really think a girl who counts her pennies in her sleep could outsmart a man who built this entire department? The upload you're doing right now, it isn't going to the cloud. It's going directly into a folder on Julian's private drive. You aren't leaking evidence. You're delivering a confession." Emily reached down and snapped the laptop shut, trapping Sarah's fingers for a painful second. The exit doors at the back of the theater clicked. The heavy thud of dress shoes echoed on the wooden floor. Sarah looked up to see the silhouette of Professor Vance framed in the doorway, his silver hair shimmering in the dim light. He adjusted his silk tie, once, twice, 3 times. "Thank you, Emily," Vance said, his voice a smooth, terrifying river of sound. "I believe Miss Miller has a lecture to attend." Sarah was led back to the lecture hall, not by the guard, but by the sheer weight of her own failure. The room was full now. 100 students sat in the tiered rows, their faces blurred and indistinct in the flickering fluorescent light. Vance didn't go to his podium. He walked to the center of the room, standing in the well of the theater like an actor on a stage. "Today," Vance began, his voice booming without the need for a microphone, "we shall discuss the ethics of the hypothetical sin." He looked directly at Sarah. She sat in the second row now, flanked by Emily on one side and a massive, broad-shouldered man she recognized as Mike Davis, a teaching assistant, on the other. "Imagine a student," Vance continued, "drowning in debt. A student who believes that the world owes her a living because she has suffered. This student finds a discrepancy in a ledger, a small, explainable error, and decides to use it as a knife. She attempts to blackmail a faculty member. Tell me, class, what is the net gain of such a soul?" Sarah felt the eyes of the entire room turn toward her. The humiliation was a physical heat, a burning brand against her skin. Vance was narrating her life, twisting her desperation into a moral failing, making her look like a predator in front of the very people she had tried to protect. "Is the student a victim of the system?" Vance asked, pacing the floor. "Or is she merely a common criminal wearing the mask of a martyr? Sarah, you've always been good with numbers. What do you think the cost of such a sin should be?" Sarah tried to reach for her phone, her fingers fumbling in her pocket. She had to delete the trail. If she could just wipe the device, maybe she could claim the files were planted. But as her thumb hit the power button, the screen flickered a violent, electric purple. A message appeared in the center of the glass. "System override. Access restricted by university administration." The phone grew hot in her hand, the smell of scorched plastic rising from the charging port. It was dead. Vance hadn't just blocked her. He had reached into her pocket and broken her only tool. The heavy oak doors of the lecture hall swung open with a bang that made Sarah jump. Robert Taylor, the dean, walked in. He looked deflated in his oversized suit, his thumb frantically rubbing the circular scar on his wrist. He didn't look at Sarah. He looked at the floor. "Professor Vance," the dean said, his voice thin and questioning. "I believe we have a scheduled meeting in 30 minutes regarding the integrity violations we discussed." "Indeed, Robert," Vance said, a thin smile touching his lips. "I believe we have all the evidence we need. Miss Miller was kind enough to provide a full digital confession just moments ago." The dean finally looked up, his eyes meeting Sarah's for a brief, flickering second before he looked away. "I see. We will convene in my office then. The board has already been notified." Sarah stood up, her chair screeching against the floor. "He's lying. He's skimming from the endowment. I have the records." But as she moved toward the aisle, a shadow blocked her path. Mike Davis, the teaching assistant, stepped in front of her. He didn't speak. He just stood there, his massive frame creating a cage of muscle and bone. He began to crack his knuckles, thumb to pinky, left hand, then right. The sound echoed through the silent room like small gunshots. "Sit down, Sarah," Vance said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to the back row. "The lesson isn't over." Sarah felt a cold wave of realization wash over her. She had been so sure of the data she'd found. It had been too easy. The spreadsheets, the hidden accounts, they had been sitting there like low-hanging fruit. "You're a clever girl, Sarah," Vance said, walking toward her desk. He leaned down, the scent of sandalwood and stale tobacco cloying and thick. "But you're young. You thought you found a secret. You thought you found my sin." He turned back to the class, his voice regaining its theatrical vibrance. "In the world of security, we use something called a canary trap. We plant false information, unique to each person who might look for it. If that information ever leaves the hive, we know exactly who the traitor is." Sarah's heart stopped. "The data you stole, Sarah. The fraud you thought you uncovered. I wrote it myself. I created those accounts 3 months ago. I labeled them in a way that only someone looking for blackmail material would find. You didn't find my corruption. You found a mirror. And you walked right into it." The class let out a collective, sharp intake of breath. Sarah felt the world tilting again. The logic was perfect. The trap was absolute. By trying to use the data, she had proven she was looking for it. She had proven her intent. The evidence she thought would save her was the very thing that would convict her. She wasn't a whistleblower. She was a thief who had been caught red-handed with marked bills. "And now," Vance said, his voice dripping with a dark, satisfied honey, "since you're so fond of ledgers, let's look at your own." He signaled to Mike Davis, who tapped a command into the podium's control panel. The massive projector screen behind Vance flickered to life. Sarah's private financial records, her bank statements, her credit card debt, her handwritten ledger pages she had scanned into her phone, appeared in giant, humiliating detail for the entire class to see. $4.12 for a sandwich, Vance read aloud, his voice mocking. $68 for a textbook she likely stole anyway. A desperate girl with a desperate father. "Tell me, Sarah, how is James doing? Still sitting in the dark in Silver Spring? Still waiting for a pension that, well, let's just say the university's endowment is a very complex machine. One that your father's future is unfortunately tied to." Sarah lunged forward, her fingers clawing for the podium, for anything to stop the display. But Vance was faster. He caught her wrist in a crushing grip, his fingers like iron bands. He leaned in, his breath hot against her ear. "If you say another word," he whispered, I will ensure your father is evicted by the end of the week. I will dismantle his life piece by piece, and I will make you watch. Do you understand the cost now? Sarah sank back into her seat, her arm throbbing where he had gripped it. She looked at her phone, lying dead on the desk. A final notification had flickered on the screen just before the battery died. A small, green check mark. Cloud backup complete. She stared at it. It wasn't the fake data. She had set her phone to auto-sync with the university's internal research server when she was working in the IT department last month. The backup hadn't been her laptop files. It had been the actual server data, the real records. But the phone was dead. The battery was a cold, black slab of glass. She had the truth in her hand, and no way to show it to the world. The dean stepped forward, his face set in a mask of bureaucratic finality. Sarah Miller, under the morality clause of your scholarship agreement, your funding is hereby revoked, effective immediately. You are also served with this notice of formal expulsion. We will be contacting the local authorities to discuss felony extortion charges. Sarah looked around the room. Emily was smiling, a small, sharp thing. Mike Davis was still guarding the door. The students were whispering, their voices a rising tide of judgment. She was alone. She was ruined. The numbers had finally consumed her. But as the dean turned to leave, Sarah felt a cold, sharp clarity settle over her. She wasn't a victim. She was a strategist. And Vance had made one mistake. He had let her keep her watch. It was a cheap, plastic smartwatch, the kind that lasted for weeks on a single charge. And it was still connected to the room's local network. Sarah didn't scream. She didn't cry. She reached down and tapped a sequence into the watch's face, a sequence she had learned during her long nights in the IT department, back when she was just a girl trying to earn enough to buy a sandwich. Override, system test, fire suppression, active. The ceiling erupted. A wall of freezing, pressurized water slammed into the room. The sound was a deafening roar, like 1,000 fists pounding on the floor at once. Students shrieked, scrambling for the exits as the air turned into a thick, blinding mist. The projector hissed and died, the image of Sarah's debt swallowed by the deluge. In the chaos, Sarah moved. She didn't run for the door. She ran for the podium. Vance was shouting, his expensive suit soaked, his silver hair plastered to his forehead. He was trying to shield his leather briefcase from the water. Sarah lunged past him, her hand darting into the open bag. She didn't take the briefcase. She took his tablet, the unlocked device he had been using to control the room's systems. She swapped it for her own corrupted laptop in a single, fluid motion. "Get her!" Vance roared, pointing a shaking finger at Sarah through the rain. Mike Davis lunged for her, but the floor was slick with water and firefighting foam. He slipped, his massive frame hitting the ground with a bone-shaking thud. Sarah sprinted for the stage door, the green exit sign her only guide. She burst out into the cool autumn air, her clothes clinging to her skin, her breath coming in sharp, icy gulps. She didn't stop. She ran until she reached the campus gates, until she was surrounded by the safety of the city's crowds. She opened the tablet. It was still unlocked. She didn't find spreadsheets. She found a portal. Vance wasn't just skimming money. He was using the university's high-speed, untraceable servers to host an international gambling ring. The endowment wasn't a fund. It was a bank for the desperate and the corrupt. The real records, the ones her phone had backed up, matched the tablet perfectly. Sarah's fingers didn't tremble this time. She opened the email app. She attached the entire drive. 2. The Boston Globe. 2. State Police Financial Crimes Division. Subject: The real cost of silence. She hit send. The next morning, the campus was silent. The Gothic buildings looked smaller somehow under the gray October sky. Sarah stood at the glass doors of the administration building, watching as two men in dark suits led Julian Vance out in handcuffs. He didn't look like a predator anymore. He looked like an old man in a wet suit. The dean was waiting for her in the lobby. He looked like he hadn't slept in a century. He rubbed his wrist scar so hard it was bleeding. "Miss Miller," he said, his voice a ghost of its former self. "The board? We've reviewed the situation. It seems there was a significant misunderstanding regarding your scholarship." "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Robert," Sarah said, her voice precise, cold. "It was a calculation, and your variables were wrong." She handed him a single sheet of paper, a new agreement, drafted by the legal aid office she'd visited at dawn. "You will reinstate my scholarship," Sarah said. "You will clear my record, and you will personally oversee the restoration of my father's pension. If you don't, the next file I leak won't be about Vance. It will be about the dean who signed off on his research for 10 years. The dean didn't argue. He took the pen and signed. Sarah walked out of the building and into the crisp New England air. The smell of rotting leaves was gone, replaced by the sharp, clean scent of the coming winter. She stopped at the fountain in the center of the quad and looked at her reflection in the water. She wasn't the girl with the plastic glasses anymore. She was the woman who had rewritten the ledger. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her notebook. She turned to a fresh page and wrote a single number: 0.00. The debt was gone. The cage was open. Sarah Miller pushed her glasses up the bridge of her nose and started to walk, her footsteps rhythmic and steady, the sound of a survivor who finally knew exactly what she was worth. The end.